My name is Brian Newby, and with me, as always, is Super Professor Bill Ellis and blogger extraordinaire Taylor Ramage. And we are going to talk about...
Ramage. That's okay.
I've been mispronouncing her name for several years now.
It's okay.
Yeah, we're close friends. Mm-hmm. I'm a schmuck. Anyway, I said I was good at faces, not names. So anyway, what we're going to talk about today is who you are. Who you are as a person. Who you are not just internally, but externally on a social scale, because who you are is very much dependent on who's around you. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about how it blows up into a grand social scale, and that's the mythological aspect, and then we're going to bring it home and talk about why all of this matters here, now, with us, okay, in this room. So, let's talk about identity formation. All right, first thing we're going to talk about. And if you look up identity in the dictionary, the exact quote is, "The fact of being who or what a person or thing is." If you understood that, you're smarter than me. I read that definition and went, well, that's just terrible. It's also incredibly individualistic. Now, I'm a sociologist, so nothing is about the individual to me. But, I thought it was very relatable to the whole Cartesian sense of cogito ergo sum, and I think, therefore I am. And that's great for old school philosophy. The problem is that if identity is who we are, where does it come from? Do we just think ourselves into existence? No. Do we just magically one day say, hey, I've decided to be XYZ? Done. No. It's not that simple. And Descartes, I think, might have been a little reductionist in that sense. Do you ever see someone trying to be something they aren't, and it's painful to watch, and you feel bad for them, and you're not quite sure how you fit into this scenario. To my mind, I was thinking of Spike trying to be the princess, and "Hey, don't worry, I've got it covered," and of course he screws everything up, and everyone's looking at him like he's nuts by the end of the episode, But how do we know that somebody isn't what they think they are? How do we know that they aren't? Well, that comes in by who makes that call, and that's all of us. We make the call for other people. Who you are is very much dependent, not just on your own personal choices, but what of those choices people accept from you. Identity has, according to any science beyond early philosophy, always been a social thing. It's very much rooted in the social. And a lot of identity theory talks about how identity is the externalization of the internal self, that you develop a self inside as you grow up. And this is a developmental thing, very big in developmental psychology. I don't know if any of the psychology people are here right now, but if you talk about like Freud, for example. Freud and a sociologist named Goffman said, our self depends on who we're with and what we're doing, what the situation is. And what does that mean? It means that our self is flexible, that sometimes you need to be one way and sometimes you need to be this. Sometimes you want to be one way and sometimes you want to be another. It's a very flexible way of doing things. Other theories from Cooley and Mead, they suggest our self develops from what we learn during social interactions. So it's not that you're making these rules up in your head, that you're making up these personality points in your head, but you learn them from other people. Certainly for any of you who are parents, and I see several of you who have brought your brood with you, good for you, you've been there. You've watched that happen as the kid starts mimicking everything you say, and then you get in trouble with your spouse because they just said something they weren't supposed to repeat. That happens to me a lot. And the thing is these theories say that as our interactions get more complex, so does our self, and that's where we start to develop complex emotions, complex feelings, and what it means is that our self also changes over time. Who you were yesterday isn't necessarily who you are today. And certainly over the span of a year, over the span of a decade, and the oldest of us, the moment right before we die, we're probably still trying to figure out exactly who we are. So that changes over time, and we choose which self we're going to put out there as a performance. This is a theory we call called dramaturgy. It's very much the sociological idea that life is a stage and we're all players upon it. Okay? That the guy playing Hamlet today, next week he's going to be playing King Lear. That sort of aspect. And we do the same thing. The people you are with your best friends. Right? Think about your best friend in the whole wide world. Are you the exact same person with that best friend as you are with your boss? Probably not. Unless, of course, you're one of those rare people who's actually friends with your boss. Kudos to you. Good luck with the promotion. The thing is any of these theories, they all come to the same basic conclusion, and that is we create a self based on how we want to be seen, and who we're with, and how we think people are going to see us. Now, I chose this particular GIF, and I'm pronouncing it with the hard G, because the two of them, we've always seen the two of them separately, but when they got together, they just made magical music, and I'm sorry I couldn't get the music. That just didn't work out. The same thing was in Rainbow Rocks, this idea that each one of them plays a different instrument, but when they all come together, bam, they're making music, they're making magic. And that worked out pretty well. Now, for those of you who are up on your pony comics, this issue just came out. So quick run downstairs and find it. After, don't do it now. And this issue of Friends Forever talks very much about identity. I thought it was perfect that this issue came out just in time for this. And it's about cadence. And we think of Cadence in the series as being very with it, very together. That she knows what she wants, she knows what she's doing. She's got the husband, now she's got the kid. She's living the princess dream. She's got her own kingdom, hooray, harumble. And in this issue, they're celebrating Princess Cadence in the Crystal Empire. And as they say, Twilight Sparkle is the princess of magic, and Cadence is the other princess. And in fact, in the comic, they call her the pretty one. And she's like, oh my God, is that it? Is that me? I've been putting myself out there, and all they see is that I'm cute. So she panics, and she thinks this reflects poorly on who she is as a ruler. And she's worried about whether or not she's worthy to be ruling the Crystal Empire. And of course, Twilight comes to the rescue as always and manages to prove to her that you're not just a pretty face, that you do so much. And the reason the Crystal Heart shines the way it does is because you inspire the denizens of the Empire. And that becomes a great big thing. And you can see from the dialogue here, it's about social, that Cadence didn't just come to that conclusion on her own, that she very much needed Twilight and the other people from the Crystal Empire, the other ponies, I'm sorry. And you'll see even here, she's no longer just the pretty princess. Twilight Sparkle has them change the name so that the identity that Cadence is trying to perform is being justified. And that's really a lot of what we want when we put our performance out there. We want that positive feedback. We want people to accept us the way we want to be accepted. Problem is that this isn't the end of the process. Otherwise, we'd all have happy endings. It doesn't always work that way. Okay? There's this wonderful little problem that we call stigma. And stigma is based on what is normal. Okay? So what is normal? What is normal? Now, in sociology, we're very cynical. So normal is whatever social structure keeps the dominant group in power. And unfortunately, the dominant group is a very small group of people that like to make puppets of the rest of us. And normal has its advantages. It does allow people to feel together. Because you're like, well, I'm normal. Are you normal? You are, great. Now we're normal together, right? But those other weirdos, woo! And that's where normal falls short. And unfortunately, it's a huge short. Because when you think about who really gets to fit into normal, it's not a long list, folks. We all have our weird. You know, and the problem with that is it ends up becoming the basic building block of discrimination. You know, the in-group, out-group mentality. And that's a dark place. Everything else that's not normal becomes deviant. Now, deviant doesn't necessarily mean bad. It means different. It means you're not normal. But what we do with that then is we use it as a form of discrimination. We use it as a basis for discrimination. This is a social matter, though. You know, in sociology, we realize just because you do something deviant doesn't mean people will label you as deviant. Sometimes they just label you as not normal because they've judged you already without you having to have ever done a thing. You never spoke, you never acted, you just sat there. Well, you're weird because you sit funny. It's like, well, come on. We find something to discriminate all the time, and that's a problem. But the thing about stigma is that, you know, a stigma is when you have something about you, physical or social, that prevents you from being labeled as normal. That one thing about you will always keep people from thinking you're normal. And that can be any sort of handicap or blemish or anything that people judge as simply not being at whatever standard they're judging you at. And it's very social, but at the same time, it's also very individualistic because who knows where that actual thing is? Where is that line? Okay? Poor Humdrum couldn't get past the fact that he was Humdrum, you know? And he didn't know what to do with himself. In this case, with stigma, you're being branded. You're having a label forced on you. And that's not what we're about. That's not what we're here about. That's not what this community is about, certainly, okay? So how do you develop a self in the face of stigmatization? What if you have a stigma, you know? To my mind, Princess Luna had a hard time getting past her stigma. Even up till season 5, she's dealing with, in Princess's Dream of Magic Sheep, she's dealing with this idea of herself as a villain. And people, they come together in the end and they say, no, you're not the villain anymore. We get it. You made a mistake. Move on. We're moving on too. And that's an important part of overcoming stigma because we can do that, all right? We live in a time where the ability for someone to feel comfortable in their own skin is a growing ideology. That we're coming to a point where we realize, you know what, people are just, they want to be a certain way. Let them be that way. Don't put them in a pigeonhole. Don't stigmatize them for it. You know, and in sociology, when we encounter this phenomenon, we call it queered. We say that things are being queered. And now queer doesn't mean weird, okay? In fact, it means the opposite. Queer theory is a gender theory that suggests that who we are biologically and how we act are not necessarily linked. That just because you are born male doesn't mean you have to be the rough and tumble lumberjack, you know, walking around eating nothing but beef, drinking nothing but beer, and looking up the bosoms, okay? That is not, and just because you're born female doesn't necessarily mean that you have to weep at every chick flick movie and that you have to always cuddle the babies, okay? Sometimes the babies need to not be cuddled, okay? The other thing about this is that we're moving past the idea that everyone needs to just be heterosexual, all right? We've made some huge leaps in the last couple years on that, and that's a great thing. And this is part of what speaks. You can be whoever you want to be in any combination, okay? Because the beauty here is when things get queered, there's no normal category anymore, right? And if there's no normal, then there's no abnormal. And this is something that we're moving forward with. We're accepting difference without judgment. You know, so I've chosen a few characters here that I think that they've moved forward, all right? When applied beyond gender studies, we can essentially state that queer theory is a society without a sense of normal identity. And if there's no standard for normal, there's no deviant. And if there's no deviant, everyone gets to be accepted for who they are. And instead of being branded, you earn your cutie mark, right? All right, I'm gonna hand it over to my man Bill here. Sorry.
Am I on?
You're on.
Am I on?
You are.
Yep.
Okay, good. I want to warn you, if you have not seen season 5, my presentation is going to contain some spoilers. I'm an academic, and so I'm used to telling my class, look, I'm going to explain to you that at the end of Moby Dick, Captain Ahab dies, and there's always somebody in the back that says, oh, man! So with that apology, I'm going to take this issue of identity and to connect it to a concept which in folklore and religious studies is called mythology. Now, what is a myth? I'm not talking about the popular sense as a myth as something that's not true or something that was believed in ancient times. I'm talking about any story that takes place in some faraway realm of magic and the supernatural that simultaneously deals with issues that are important here and now. A myth is both unreal in that it presents a fantasy and extremely relevant to the real present moment in that it's looking at problems and concepts that are important. And by creating this alternative frame of reality, it allows people to think about these problems in an especially clear way. It's an essential human skill. Myths are central to religions. They underlie the worlds in fairy tales, fantasy novels, cartoon series. It's important in psychological therapy because fantasies are used to try to get patients to develop more positive self-identities. And they involve what religious scholars call world building, an especially creative way of understanding the world that we live in. The creation and maintenance of imaginary worlds is actually using the same strategies that we use to describe the world in which we live, the way in which all human meaning is created. So myths are important. Now, to start with a myth that everybody knows or should know. A long, long time ago, there were two divine beings. One was in charge of day, the other was in charge of night. But really, as this yin-yang symbol implies, they were actually mirror image sides of the same divine force. Luna and Celestia are the same personality. The Luna side rebelled and tried to become Nightmare Moon. The Celestia side used harmony to overpower Luna and banished her. But because Luna and Celestia are the same personality, Luna cannot be destroyed but will eventually come again. Now, this core myth, the divine diabolical twins, is something that parallels lots and lots of stories in American popular culture. God and Satan in the Christian mythology, also in the Islamic mythology, but also the Wizard of Oz. Are you a good witch or a bad witch? Star Wars. Many comic book series. I just give Batman and the Joker here because I like this particular graphic I found that makes it clear that Batman is on some level the Joker. The Joker is on some level Batman. The two are coexistent. One cannot live without the other. And the ultimate point here is that we always think of identity, the ego, as singular. I am Bill Ellis. But actually, as mythology makes it clear, identity is plural. We have multiple selves, some of which seem to have positive traits, some of which seem to have negative traits. So it would be fairer to say, we are Bill Ellis. At least I am. Now, core myths show up in contemporary times. And it's interesting that the My Little Pony saga starts with the application of the core myth in real life. Twilight Sparkle reads the myth. Oh my gosh, I didn't know about this. Now, it's interesting, of course, that it's a myth about night and day. And twilight, as we all know, is the time exactly between night and day. It could be night going into day, it could be day going into night. In any case, she reads the myth, and by golly, 1,000 years doesn't mean anything, because as soon as she reads it, it begins to come true in her life. And there's Nightmare Moon. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? She enlists the help of her friends and is able to defeat her, and we have the beginning of equestrian history. Or it seems that we do. Not so fast. Because in most mythologies of this kind, evil doesn't need to be understood, it just simply needs to be defeated and destroyed, or at least banished, making the happy ending just a respite in something that turns out to be an eternal duel. But what happens next is that the myth gets reworked. Luna is not destroyed, she's not banished, she returns to her original place. She becomes one of the cast. This shows up over and over in the My Little Pony saga. The diabolical divine twin myth is deconstructed as we have villains that are not destroyed, not banished, but rehabilitated. And so what this means is that the saga is really committed to what I call creative mythology, generating new myths based on real-life concerns, rather than relying on old myths. Not a top-down way of controlling social behavior. If you do this, Satan's gonna get you, you know. Maybe there isn't a Satan. Maybe we are Satan. Myths can be used to challenge deep-seated cultural norms. It can serve as a way of combining, rectifying positive and negative personality traits. And it can be queer. It can be a way of generating identity, just as we see in the series that the ponies are committed to an evolving sense of who they are and what they are. And so we get to season 5. I almost called it chapter 5, didn't I? The first lines of it make an interesting point. If the main 6 have been able to overcome all of the challenges so far, well then when do we get happily ever after? Why? Twilight Sparkle asks. Why? It's an important question. It's a question we all ask. And at that moment, the Starlight Glimmer story arc is generated. Twilight Sparkle is to Starlight Glimmer exactly as Celestia is to Luna. The parallelisms make this clear at once. And both characters are committed to creating a magical realm of friendship. And I would say that like Celestia and Luna, they are indivisible. They represent 2 aspects of a single identity, and in really a very complicated way, because it's not good versus evil, it's not dark versus light, it's other versus other. Because Starlight says, I brought you friendship. I brought you equality. I created harmony. Well, isn't that what the main 6 are basically doing? Except that Starlight wants to use it as a top-down mythology. All of you are gonna tolerate and love each other or else. And that, of course, is a lesson that Twilight actually learns. You cannot actually tolerate and love the shit out of people. It also challenges what I like to call the mythic status of the main 6. We like to see them as superheroes, as destined to carry out the roles. But then Starlight goes back in time and she starts making changes in history and activates the butterfly effect. That's an interesting concept. It comes originally out of meteorology, becomes a key idea in chaos theory. And it's something that gets explained in some detail at the beginning of the next to last episode of season 5. You see Twilight here explaining this with a great deal of glee, and then you see her pause, and she almost thinks, well, what if something had happened that had screwed up the chain of events that led to the creation of the main 6? What would have happened if there'd been a little tiny change? And she looks out in the audience, and by golly, there's Starlight Glimmer there. So I think once again, she creates her alter ego. And as we see the two of them dueling in the past, making changes, trying to unmake changes, the present also becomes increasingly fluid. Villains whom we've seen defeated or rehabilitated all of a sudden show up again. They are unrepentant and triumphant. And we see the other members of the main 6 as the minions of these tyrants. But they're the same people that they are in the canonical series, just in a different situation. As Goffman says, they've become someone else, not because they've changed their identity, but because it's prudent for them to become someone else in a different situation. They are not good or evil, they're just in a different setting. And witnessing this, Starlight Glimmer allows herself to be defeated. And she admits that the reason that she was committed to her quest was because of a seemingly trivial event, just as a similarly trivial event set Twilight and the main 6 on their path. And it follows from that that evil is not something that comes from outside the world that infects people. It's only one potential of a given identity. Following from that, we could see friendship as queer in its nature, not the expression of some kind of timeless ethical norm as Starlight originally believed, but it's also true that Twilight and Starlight have to accept that they are mirror images of each other. Starlight could become a great magical princess if she applied herself. Maybe she will in future seasons. Twilight could also become a kind of a petty tyrant like Starlight if she became so overcommitted to her quest for creating friendship wherever she went that she started to deny the unique identities of the people that she's dealing with. And this point is further elaborated at the season's midpoint. Brian told me that actually when these were first broadcast, there was a significant pause at this point, as if this were the end of the 5th season. Because I think this episode was emphasized because it's also dealing with identity. Nominally, it's about the dark power that comes in and affects the other ponies' dreams. But actually, I think it's an exploration, again, of the plurality of identity, the we behind each of the ponies' selves. The Tantabus creates a paradox. It makes dreams disturbing, not necessarily scary, but it also allows them to escape some of the repressive restrictions on their identities. I am absolutely blown away by the idea that Fluttershy could be really a vampire bat. I am also amazed by the idea that Big Mac could become a great alicorn. But these are all potentials that these people have to realize. And so when you're generating your identity, when you're deciding who you are, if you're going to dream, then why not a dragon knight in shining armor riding on the back of a giant derpy to save the world? Yeah, we can all be that. I'd like to be that someday. So in conclusion, I think it's important that My Little Pony is not based on a top-down, pre-existing cultural mythology of absolute evil as something to be avoided at all costs. Rather, it considers ethics and identities as queer, generated not from eternal verities from another mythological world, but from fluttering butterfly wings. And history, too, is queer, the projection of small social actions, which, when done for good, have a surprisingly cumulative impact on the world, and of course, when done for impure reasons, can have a surprisingly negative impact, which is something I'd like us all to remember in this election year. Thank you. Let me get this out.
Thank you.
This is a lot to cover, so if there's anyone that would like to have a copy of the slides, I'm going to leave this out. You just give me your email number. And out and down.
So let's ground these big ideas of identity into some other things that we see in My Little Pony, especially regarding cutie marks. Season 5 provides a much richer exploration of what cutie marks mean than in previous seasons. In the season opener, we see a village where ponies have all the same cutie mark. The idea is that if everyone has the same cutie mark, no one will feel excluded. It's a noble idea in principle, but the execution is extremely flawed. Starlight Glimmer imposes this way of life on everyone in the village, and the result is that no pony is able to live up to their true talents or interests. In an effort to make sure identity never becomes a cause for exclusion, Starlight Glimmer erases identity altogether. Really, this village presents the opposite of what Equestria stands for and how it seems to run. After all, the main 6 represent the elements of harmony, not the elements of sameness. Harmony, in the most technical musical sense, refers to pitches or tones that come together to form chords. Sure, everyone can follow the same melody, but you don't get chords or a full or complete sound with everyone singing the same note at the same pitch. This is the ideal that My Little Pony presents. Its definition of harmony is manifested in the main 6, who exist uniquely but united. My Little Pony reaffirms uniqueness and identity via special talents. Its default is diversity over sameness. So Starlight Glimmer loses not only because she's a fraud, but also because the worldview she posits seeks to deny an intrinsic part of Pony's nature and identity rather than celebrate it and confront the inevitable discomfort that those differences will bring. Friendship and diversity are magic because they let these differences exist in full rather than subduing them. But Starlight Glimmer was right about one thing. Cutie marks cause anxiety about identity. We see this most clearly in the episode where Apple Bloom is freaking out about getting her cutie mark, and she has all these nightmares. She dreams about getting her cutie mark, but each version of the dream gives her something that's weird or something she doesn't like. And the worst part is that getting her cutie mark means that she loses her friends and family. So cutie marks, as far as we know, are permanent. They may magically glow like when the main 6 are called on missions, or may appear as equal signs because of a spell, but they don't fundamentally change or disappear forever. So ponies are stuck with them, and that prospect of being permanently defined is terrifying. And tons of us grapple with that same question. What if this mark of who I am doesn't actually fit me? Whether it's a job, a gender, a sexual orientation, a racial or ethnic category, or any other label, there's always that tension where the visible or most understood label might not accurately or completely capture the experiences or identities of the groups described. And then there's the fear of rejection. Will my friends and family still love me if my cutie mark, my identity, isn't what they thought it would be? But Apple Bloom's story ends happily. Honestly, I thought the Cutie Mark Crusaders would never get their cutie marks, or that it would happen in the very last season of the show. Because remaining blank flanks would have provided a nice connection for kids and adults alike who have no idea what they're supposed to do with their lives. But that said, I think it's cool that the Cutie Mark Crusaders got their cutie marks, and I especially like how it was done. Because Apple Bloom and her friends discover their own purposes through helping an enemy. Up to this point, Diamond Tiara is portrayed as this shallow, privileged brat. She's done nothing but bully the Cutie Mark Crusaders, especially Apple Bloom. And that's all we see of her as well until this episode, where Apple Bloom starts paying closer attention to her and learns about the difficult relationship she has with her mother. It's when Apple Bloom opens herself to understanding Diamond Tiara that she sees her as a complete, complex being. With this new understanding, she encourages her friends to do the same. These actions ultimately cause the Cutie Mark Crusaders to get their cutie marks, these signifiers of identity and purpose. Now, Diamond Tiara has had her cutie mark for a long time, but she wonders if she was branded too soon, and admits to not truly understanding what her cutie mark means. In a sense, she's living one of Apple Bloom's fears. However, by the end of the episode, she sees a new way to apply her talent of getting others to do what she wants. She begins to understand that she can use her position as a rich pony to benefit the larger community, and she comes to this understanding because she was invited into Apple Bloom's community when she had no one else to turn to. Loving an enemy is transformative because it requires you to push away the pride at seeing that person fail or protecting your own self-interest by knowing and hating only one facet of that person. This, or something like it, is at the core of each antagonist's redemption story throughout the series. So we've looked at some ways that My Little Pony explores identity within the rules of its own universe, but now let's talk about what happens when we as audience members bring our own understandings of identity to the show when we watch and react to it. The episode Brother Hooves Social sparked tons of strong responses from the fandom and from people involved in the show. To summarize real quick, Applejack gets called on a friendship mission / gaycation with Rarity in Manhattan, which means that she has to back out of the Sister Hooves Social at the last minute. And Apple Bloom is super disappointed. Meanwhile, Big Mac sees just how much Apple Bloom adores Applejack, and he starts missing the days when he was Apple Bloom's hero. He just keeps building and building on this insecurity to the point where he basically feels like he's not important to Apple Bloom anymore. But once he hears that Applejack can't participate in the Sister Hooves Social, he thinks, all right, I'll do it. This is my chance to be a part of Apple Bloom's life again and make sure she's happy. Granny Smith said something about it's too bad some cousins couldn't visit. All right then, I need to dress up as a mare. This is his logic, despite the fact that almost every character who mentions participation in the activities make an aside that the definition of sister has always been loose. So Big Mac becomes Orchard Blossom, dressing up in a manner that's pretty exaggerated. Many viewers recognize this as drag. We haven't really seen this in Equestria before, but we know it as something that exists in our world. Still, almost everyone can tell right away that Orchard Blossom is Big Mac, but he continues on, participating in the games, singing and dancing, and trying to make his character believable. Apple Bloom, however, is annoyed most of the time. So all of Big Mac's attempts to make this day go well culminate in a race where he crushes and powers through all the obstacles just to win because he thinks it'll make Apple Bloom happy. This is finally what gets him into trouble with the judges. Big Mac thinks they're going to take issue with what he's wearing and with this entire persona of Orchard Blossom. Instead, their problem is his unsportsmanlike conduct. They reiterate the loose definition of sister for the competition. This suggests that they care more about behavior than how one dresses. By not making a big deal about Big Mac wearing a dress and instead making the lesson out of his behavior, this episode attempts to show that when things like gender expression don't derail our interactions with each other, then we can get into deeper questions about the content of someone's character. Who cares if a man wears a dress? Is he cheating in a race? Did he just give a homeless person a meal? Did he push someone out of the way? Did he return a lost wallet? In fact, Apple Bloom is the one with the most overtly negative attitude about Big Mac's scheme. At every moment, she expects to be disqualified because Big Mac is a stallion, and she doesn't try to hide her anger at that. On the bright side, it's the adult ponies around her, like the judges, who say, oh no, we have no problem with the fact that he's a stallion. It's the reckless behavior we don't approve of. But was Brother Hooves Social really that successful in presenting this message? Some felt that, yeah, it took elements commonly seen in media that mocks trans women and ultimately doesn't mock or judge them. In other words, it presents the familiar trope pattern only to flip it in the end. But others said, no, this is really a rehash of those same tropes. Most of the episode's humor still comes from the fact that Big Mac is in a dress. Some people also said that this episode shows a drag performance and it's therefore not representing trans women at all. I think that's an important distinction to make. Drag and trans are not interchangeable. Not all trans people do drag, and not all drag performers are trans. Big Mac could be trans, or Orchard Blossom might be a drag persona, or maybe it's both. Another way to understand this is that Equestria is a world where female characters hold all the positions of power. The feminine is default. This is especially apparent in the first couple seasons where the only male characters are Big Mac, Spike, Snips and Snails, Discord, and a handful of others who only appear in one episode. This shifts in later seasons, but My Little Pony is still very much a girl cartoon. So Big Mac is this caricature of masculinity, strong, silent, literally says 2 words most of the time. He's in this default feminine society, and his own family is entirely female. He sees that Applejack and Applebloom have a dynamic that he doesn't experience. So this otherwise masculine guy then tries to become the default because it may help him fit in. He embraces femininity, though it's an exaggerated expression. But this isn't the first time Big Mac imagined himself in a more feminine light. And we're seeing this again. In the episode Do Princesses Dream of Magic Sheep, he transforms into an alicorn to ward off some flying muffins trying to attack him. This homage to Sailor Moon is certainly awesome, but I think it's also interesting that when Big Mac thinks about power, specialness, and magic, he thinks of the feminine, because that's the default in his world. Maybe he's at the beginning stages of exploring and embracing another part of his identity. But I do think more common reactions to this episode focus on if it's trans representation and if it's helpful or harmful. One way to interpret the strange looks that other ponies give Big Mac is that their reactions to him acting so out of character. Suddenly, he's this boisterous, energetic pony, and no one's seen him act like that before. But as one trans woman said in a Reddit discussion about this episode, those looks are all too familiar. They're too close to judgment that trans people, particularly trans women, face on a daily basis. So Peter New, Big Mac's voice actor, made a Facebook post articulating both his understanding of Big Mac as a character and about trans misogyny. He says, Big Mac's fear for me isn't that he'll be discovered as a man, it's that he'll be discovered as wrong or as vulnerable or as less than perfect. And a little bit later he says, to my mind, anyone laughing just because a stallion is wearing frills is behind the times. And many reactions on Tumblr were heated. To sift through the noise, I focus on finding posts made by trans women, but to respect the fact that these are personal blogs, I don't want to display or state their URLs, but I do want to summarize their perspectives. So one Tumblr user said that she couldn't watch this episode again. To her, it was clearly transphobic because Big Mac was very obviously trying to pass as female, but then other characters dismissed him as a stallion in a dress. And many Tumblr users, cis and trans, had similarly strong reactions. But like with any marginalized community, there isn't a singular opinion that all trans women have on this episode. Sometimes cisgender allies perceive a particular opinion on a TV show like this, and with our hearts in the right place, we're filled with righteous anger and amplify what we think the, quote, trans opinion is, to the point of telling trans people what should and shouldn't offend them. That's the issue that another trans Tumblr user had with the fandom's discourse after this episode aired. Cis people aren't really listening to trans people or being allies or friends when we argue with them about what does and doesn't hurt them. In a similar vein, a third trans woman used the term manufactured outrage to describe the fandom reaction. To her, the episode was quite clear that none of the characters had a problem with how Big Mac dressed. She noted that so many people only see cross-dressing as a socio-political commentary, and that leads folks to categorize this episode as either pro-trans or anti-trans. But equestrians don't have the exact same gender constructs or gender politics that we do because they're ponies. We see this briefly in the first Equestria Girls movie, where Twilight doesn't understand the markings on the bathroom doors because she's never had to think about the gender binary to pee. I bring all this up not to try and arrive at a definite answer, but to show that there is diversity of opinion and that identity, whether we claim very specific labels or reject labels altogether, isn't this cut and dry thing that we can neatly categorize. So, one of the things that I really enjoy about BronyCon is that the people are pretty friendly and carry out that respectful attitude the fandom was founded on. BronyCon is also the first fandom convention that I've ever been to that has gender-neutral bathrooms. You can applaud. So that level of consideration says to me that this fandom is full of good friends and good listeners. Also, this convention was founded by a trans woman, Purple Tinker, so I believe it's important to get us thinking and caring about these issues. Letting that diversity exist in full, working through it, and understanding each other is the magic of friendship. So in that spirit of friendship, I'd like to take a few minutes to invite any trans girls or trans women in the audience to share your thoughts about this episode. If you're not comfortable sharing, that's totally fine. I'm not here to out anyone or put anyone on the spot, but I do want to make sure you're heard. And just so you're aware, this panel is being video recorded. For everyone else, let's just listen to these perspectives. It's one thing to see people's posts online, but it's a completely different dynamic when you're in the same room. And then we'll open it up to a general discussion in a couple minutes, and then close out with a song, if that's okay. So if anybody who feels comfortable and would like to share that experience, please, I guess, raise your hand, come forward. Oh, there's a mic.
Microphone is right over here.
Okay.
Anyone?
All right, then, oh, sorry, go right ahead.
I was wondering if I could say a very brief opinion on that episode, although I am cisgender.
Mm-hmm.
Take the
Am I
mic.
loud enough, or do I need the microphone? Okay, I'm loud enough. I'm a loud guy. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. There was an old Star Trek Next Generation episode called Outcast, where there's a romance that also involves gender identity. And I just want to say, this episode, where Big Mac, whether it's whether it's just drag for him, or whether they're hinting at that he identifies as a woman, whether sometimes or just all the time, I think this episode needed to happen. That's just my opinion, but I think that there needs to be more episodes that push the boundary of what's accepted in entertainment so that the conversation continues. Because the conversation can't continue on like a broad cultural level if we think it's too taboo to talk about it in children's shows.
Right. Thank you.
Well said.
Excellent. Go right ahead.
I'm gender questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the direction of femininity,
Mm-hmm.
but the other way.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk about, as someone who believes they might be a trans man,
Mm-hmm.
I really see Big Mac's desire to be a princess and his fear
Mm-hmm.
that he's maybe being the wrong kind of whatever feminine part of himself that he wants to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
As something that I can see why this made so many people so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because people think that you're reaching for power when you try to change who you are. And people think that that's power that isn't deserved.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if we've got this very different gender thing in equestrian, but his little sister still seems embarrassed by his cross-dressing, and
Mhm.
it really doesn't seem to be just because he's trying to be something he's not,
Mhm.
but because he's trying to be something he's not in such an awkward way
Mhm.
that it's clear that there is a proper way to be.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. There's all that level of complexity to tease out. Yeah, go right ahead.
I was just going to comment playing off her is I worry that focusing too much on whether this is trans, pro-trans,
Mhm.
discussion all might be reading far too much into a much simpler episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible Applejack is frustrated simply because Big Mac is being false. He's being
Mhm.
exaggerated. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter that he's being an exaggerated female. It's Sartre.
Mhm.
It's bad faith. He is playing at being something he isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me the core episode really comes in at the very end, where it's about Big Mac's struggle to express himself and be genuine. And to me, that speaks to a different kind of gender political discussion, which is toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah,
They
exactly.
aren't allowed to have the feelings.
Yeah.
Jack Hill's fandom is a rejection of, way to go, guys.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Yes, go right ahead.
It doesn't work.
Does it need to flip? There it is.
Yeah. I'll go. Like, I wanted to talk about labels. Like, I think people get really caught up on trying to find the label that correctly describes themselves. And like when we talk about gender, sex, sexuality, it's so complex. There's so many different like directions of spectrums. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. You need to learn to be comfortable with yourself. It doesn't really matter what label you call yourself. It just, and whether that word it shouldn't define you. You define who you are.
Right.
Like right now, all right, so I'm gender fluid, and I have a gay boyfriend, which is really awkward for him because he's like, well, you're biologically female, and I'm gay, and now he's having this entire like identity confusion. He's like, I don't want to be bisexual, but I'm like, you are who you are. You don't have to fit into this box.
Right. Right. And your gender identity doesn't necessarily define his sexual orientation.
Right.
So thank you for sharing. So we have.
No, one over here on the end.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you need a mic? I think this one.
Okay.
Okay.
So my question is, it's not really a question, I'm not entirely sure, it's a little bit off topic, but I think the reason I enjoy this episode is because, not because he's necessarily trans, but kind of the opposite. Because what I've seen more and more in TV, movies, is that people are like, oh, they put a gay person in this movie, that's really progressive. Well, I think it's not. Because what they're doing isn't putting a gay person in this movie, they're adding a gay personality. There's like, a lot of movies say, oh, this person is funny, this person's shadowy, he's dark, and this person's gay. That's his personality. And the reason I like this episode is because it gives Big Mac a personality outside of being trans or gay or cross-dressing, which to me is kind of a more progressive step than what other TV show and movies have been doing.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That that tendency of reducing to any identity is a real problem. Like, and it's really good to have that complexity. So then a question that I have for you guys, a little bit of a more general question, is how have you struggled with or embraced identity, and how has My Little Pony helped with that, if that's a part of your journey?
Hello, Courtney. This is kind of off topic, but when I was growing up, I had, when I still had developmental disabilities, and after I got in this show, I've become more open about it because I don't define myself by what the doctors had diagnosed me with or what others labeled me with, but in spite of them.
That's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
No, that's right on topic.
Yeah, that's
Because the thing that we want to stress here as well is that while we are definitely keeping a gendered focus here. It does that kind of moving past labels and being fluid in identity in general is something that
Yeah, so
transcends
just
gender and
wanted
race
to
and all
share
of those
that no
categories.
matter what gender, sexuality, religion, or anything that people or yourself define you, it doesn't have to necessarily define exactly all of who you are as a person.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see him. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Hey, how's it going?
Hey there.
Yeah, okay. So in the topic of identity, me personally, I sort of just focus on, I guess you could say, my character, the other people's character. Growing up or what have you, I never really fit in with the culture around me, so I tend to just like go online and join online communities and stuff. And what I learned in these places is that a lot of the time is that it's much more important how the person is, like whether they're a good person, whether they're pleasant or not pleasant, stuff like that, than what they define themselves as. Because it's like online, you find all sorts of people who, gender fluid or maybe male, well, obviously male, female, gender fluid, or even people that want to, be animals and stuff, And I'm like, well, that's something, but okay, you seem pretty cool. Want to play some games? That's kind of how,
It was only just so simple as you just want to play a game?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because like at the end of the day, we all living, breathing. We all want the same thing. We want some happiness, be accepted, and, have a little fun.
Yep.
So, for me, it's just, I just judge by the character, not really, the physical appearance. That's my 2 cents anyway.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh. All right. So I'm actually a sociology student myself at Penn State, actually. But I spent the last semester actually doing a qualitative study on our local Brony group. And one thing that strikes me, and I'll ask this question to everybody, because this is one of those things that keeps coming back with me, is how many people feel like in this fandom you've found your people? Yeah. And this is a thing that comes back to me time and time again, because there's this whole sense of social identity that really gets strong in this community. And the thing about it is, like, the label Brony within ourselves and how we own it seems to transcend anything about gender, race, sexuality, you name it. It's like you're a Brony too? Cool. And even like, I know for the group that I've been working with, even if you're not a Brony, it's like, still come hang out with us. And that's one of the things that I've loved about the community in general. And I think that's a thing, the sense that I get, and I'm always interested to hear other opinions on this, is it feels like this is a mindset that's been brewing, and a lot of us have just been waiting for something to bring us together. And Pony happened at the right place at the right time to bring everyone together almost. And here we are.
All right.
I agree.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. So my whole feelings and positions on gender, sexuality are a little complicated and somewhat embarrassing, so I won't get into that. But one part of my identity that I kind of feel I'm starting to become more comfortable discussing with in public because of this fandom and because of the show is suicidality. I've had friends who are heavily suicidal, a lot of them in fact, and I've been suicidal myself, and things like Do Princesses Dream of Magic Sheep, which I feel was a very, very well done metaphor for suicidality. I feel that that was probably what they were going for. And people like Somber, who wrote Project Horizons, who just coming out and frankly say, look, I wrote that to keep me from killing myself. I feel that having it affected my life so much, I feel that it's important to talk about. It's kind of a taboo subject. It scares people who haven't been there. I know because I had a suicidal friend before I was suicidal, and it was scary to deal with, right? And so now I'm afraid of making other people afraid from being frank about that part of my life. But seeing that in the show, having them touch that just really moved me. Seeing people like Somber talk about it openly gives me courage to talk about it more, because I want to talk about it, because I don't want other people to die. I don't want other people to suffer like I had to suffer, like my friends had to suffer. So yeah, I do feel that this fandom is helping us be more open about the things that we need to be open about.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
All right. You guys, and then I think we're going to get kicked off the stage.
You stepped here again. Did you want to speak again? Okay, because I didn't want to gank your spot. Just making sure, because it's, okay. All right. I didn't mean to do that. I guess I'll just, so I'm sure I'm not the only one in the building. I may be the only one in the room, but maybe not. But I'm an atheist, and you will, okay. But anyone who isn't an atheist, you already know what it feels like to be an atheist, because you're a brony, and most of society has no clue what that means. But they'll argue against it anyway. And that's what's like being an atheist. And that's why I feel like I'm at least a part of, there's some kind of level of sympathy and empathy when I'm amongst bronies as opposed to other communities. I'm not even a big community guy, but I feel like I can manage, to wander around BronyCon and find friends and stuff. But I'm glad I'm not the only one here. That's pretty awesome. Thank you.
All right.
All right, I'm going to make this quick because I got to wrap the panel up. But Herbal Tinker did actually get news of your shout out, and
Okay.
I guess she didn't know about this panel existing.
Oh.
And she is offering free LGBT flags in booth 508 in
Excellent.
the vendor hall. So if anyone
Awesome.
wants to
So
grab one of those, you can
go
over there,
visit
grab
her
one.
and thank her for her work and being a part of starting this convention.
Yep.
So
Great,
just
thank
to end on a happy sing-song note, is everyone familiar with the tune "This Little Light of Mine"? Is that a familiar song? Yeah. So can we sing together "This Cutie Mark of Mine"? Yay! Ready? This cutie mark of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This cutie mark of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
Oh, baby.
This cutie mark of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.